What's up, everybody? We're back. Breakout Finder Videocast. I'm Nate Liss. You can find me on Twitter at @AnOutrageedJew. And with me, as always, is Mr. Ryan Lopes. You can find him on Twitter at StillRyan5. What's up, man? What's happening?
Bro, we are. It is Tuesday, the 23rd. That means we are a couple days out here from the real thing, from day one. It's gonna be something. It always is. Every year, everyone gets hyped, man. Every year, it's this is gonna be the craziest draft ever, and this is probably gonna be right up there with all that. So I'm excited for all the nonsense and the craziness and all the trades and everything else that's gonna go down.
Yeah, this should be an incredible draft. And like you said, it's right around the corner. We're excited for day one. I'm always super pumped for day one. Speaking of day one, we got a couple guys on this list that are going to go day one. Now, if you're watching this, obviously you can see the banner at the bottom. This is the top 5 tight ends. Again, Ryan put together a list right here. Ryan is the deep diver here, man. He's doing all the film watching, all the extra hours, grinding it out all the time.
That's what we do.
Yeah, bringing you this list with his top 5. Most people that are aware of this tight end class are very aware of the top 2, without a doubt. Typically, number 3 is pretty well known as well. And then I think that there's a little bit of fluctuation on some lists, but Ryan's list looks pretty consistent with things that I've seen. And we'll dive right into it. I also want to say, since this is, in addition to a video cast, also a podcast, for people out there, if you're hearing it, if you've got feedback, things that we can change, I always rip out the music in the podcasts. The views are going way up, which is cool. So a lot of people are listening to it, which is awesome. Glad we can provide content on kind of different platforms. A lot of people have been talking to me about, I think it's maybe Google or Stitcher, one of them. It's coming. I don't know what's going on. It's out of my hands. I can't do anything about it.
Hands are tied.
Yeah. My hands are tied. It will be on all platforms at some point. Check back. If it's not there, yell at me on Twitter. Yell at Ryan on Twitter.
Yell at me.
Yeah, yell at Ryan. Not enough people yell at him. I get yelled at all the time. I think we're going to jump right into this, Ryan.
Yeah.
So we're going to go right from the top, starting at number 1. And your number 1, which seems like consensus amongst big media scouts, dynasty players, fantasy players, amateur scouts. I think a lot of people are a fan of him. TJ Hockenson out of Iowa. Why is he your number 1?
He's a Matt Kelly favorite, as we discussed a few weeks ago at this point. So that automatically moves him way up the board. Nah, man. I mean, honestly, between as you kind of hit on, bro, the top of this class is kind of straightforward. The second player that we're going to talk about in a little bit here is not going to be a surprise to anybody. I went back and forth personally a couple times, and Hawk just seems like he does enough testing wise, at the NFL Combine, did enough, box score wise, and then you go to the tape and you see someone that probably separates himself as a inline player, as a blocker, which I think is probably more valuable for his next step. He should see the field more, and I know that the George Kittle comparisons are definitely out there. Same school, similar play style and stuff like that. Obviously not quite the athlete that Kittle was coming out, but I guess, again, I don't think those are too far-fetched. It's not where I would go personally. Our friends over at Player Profile dropped an Ian Thomas as the best comparable, which Ian Thomas was a player that I was super high on myself when he came out a year or two ago, whenever it was. As far as TJ Hockenson, some kind of important numbers to hit on. We talked about the NFL Scouting Combine. 6'5", 250, 4'7", 40, 37.5-inch vert, which are solid numbers, 123-inch broad. So again, checking those boxes athletically. Again, not the athlete that Noah Fant was, not the athlete that George Kittle was, but still definitely not a slouch either, which is important. And again, when he was competing at Iowa, running opposite Noah Fant. His sophomore season, he's a redshirt sophomore, obviously. 760 yards, 15.5 yards a catch, and 6 scores last year. So again, did enough tight end wise as far as the box scores and stuff are concerned. So as far as Hockenson and the next level, again, this is more or less, we're just talking draft prospects here, but we can definitely draw the fantasy parallel as well. So a player that, again, as I touched on before, is probably going to end up seeing the field early. There's going to be definitely the draft capital there. And again, his ability as a blocker is going to allow him to, hopefully he goes to a coaching staff that's going to end up, utilizing him, properly. But his ability in line is going to get him on the field, a little more consistently than some of these other players. And he's just really fun after the catch, man. So again, the George Kittle comparisons is not exactly where I would go, but I don't think they're too far off either. But again, just feels like a pretty safe player, him and a tight end too, for that matter. But just a really good player at a top of a pretty strong tight end class.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the George Kittle thing, I don't necessarily see it either. I understand that there's, you see the receiving prowess. Obviously, from a production standpoint, TJ Hockenson was much more productive in college. George Kittle didn't really show what we see in the NFL necessarily. We didn't see him as like a possession volume receiver, a guy that you can get the ball in his hands and he's going to catch the ball 80, 90, 100 times a year. We didn't see that in college, and he didn't necessarily meet that threshold that I typically look at when I look at a tight end coming into the league. But with that athleticism, so high end. And even when you talk about Hockenson, 75th percentile spark, I know you touched on this. This is a guy that's incredibly athletic. I mean, he's not Noah Fant athletic, but who's Noah Fant athletic? I mean, we're talking about sort of a one-of-one guy when we get to him, which obviously he's on this list. Mm-hmm. But TJ Hockenson, you're exactly right. As a blocker, he showed a ton, and I think that's what teams are going to love. He's going to immediately compete right away. He's a guy you can put on the field. He's not a liability. He can do his blocking assignments. He's efficient as a receiver. He's going to give you a dynamic weapon sort of in the intermediate and deep game for a tight end. So he's a big advantage to the roster that he goes to. And I don't even necessarily think that he's landing spot dependent. But I don't know that in the end for TJ Hockenson that he's necessarily going to be a George Kittle level producer in dynasty and fantasy. I don't think that a team is going to target him 120 times a year. But this could be a guy in the future that could flirt with that 65, 70 catch a season range and be an awesome producer. I'm just not. We had a conversation with Matt Kelly the other day, and I can say this freely without grenades being lobbed at me from the other side. I don't necessarily think that he ever leapfrogs what Noah Fant's, potential production is. I think Noah Fant is going to be a guy that in this class is gonna go, exceed what we think TJ Hockenson is capable of, and he's the guy I want to own at tight end. But in terms of, overall NFL draft, excluding dynasty, not talking fantasy, I mean, the most well-rounded tight end in this class is clearly TJ Hockenson. I mean, for all the reasons you touched on. Okay, so we've mentioned his name a couple times now, and it's pretty obvious. Again, anybody that's even slightly up on this draft class has heard these two names. Same college, even more athletic, Noah Fant out of Iowa, number 2 on your list. Why do you have Noah Fant number 2 and TJ Hockenson number 1?
I mean, for me, again, I go back to Hawk's ability and in line. I think he's just as dynamic, as Noah Fant is as far as the receivers. So for me, the blocking ability kind of separates them. Whereas if someone else had Fant ahead of Hawk, I imagine they're coming back to this, as you touched on before, this super rare athletic profile. He's up there with obviously the George Kittles. In fact, at player profile, he has the George Kittle comparison. And again, that's when you talk about George Kittle, you're talking about these Mike Gesicki type level athletes, just stupid athletes. And we're talking about 6'4", 250, 4'5", 40. 39.5-inch vertical, just alien type numbers, man. 127-inch broad. So again, with Noah Fant, I think the whole argument, or the whole story, I should say, coming into the combine was everyone knew this kid was going to absolutely shatter and smoke the combine, and he did not disappoint. So again, we've talked about it on past pods, or past videos, whatever. We talk about these players. Is it one of those things do you really want to count it twice? If you thought Fant was a stellar athlete and his stock was high because of that, then obviously the combine did nothing but simply support your initial claim, and you saw that on tape, and obviously he went ahead and backed it up. So again, certainly checks the athleticism box. You can make the argument that his ceiling remains higher because of that. So I totally get that. Again, anybody that has one over the other, I don't think you're really going to get too many crazy looks in that regard. As far as production, his sophomore season, 30 receptions and 11 scores. So just stupid efficiency as well to go along with the athletic profile. Dipped a little bit the following year with his junior campaign with only 7 scores, eclipsed 500 yards. So again, we're talking tight end production here, so those numbers will certainly satisfy. If you go look at the tape again, you see a player that can get it done after the catch. Obviously, with his touchdown dominance was certainly a factor in the red area. There are questions about his hands. He did have some unusual drops. And again, isn't quite the blocker. Not to say he's a bad blocker, but isn't the level that someone like Kittle was coming out, or obviously someone like TJ Hockenson was. So again, it's the athletic profile you're probably going to keep coming back to with Noah Fant. The draft capital is definitely going to be there. He's going to go high. He's going to see playing time immediately, given that early investment. So again, just a player that there's a lot to like, and the two kind of consensus players in this group.
And with Noah Fant, man, neither of these guys had an incredible amount of catches in college. But again, this isn't typical at tight end. You're not going to see the same type of production you would out of a wide receiver. But Noah Fant was averaging almost a touchdown for every 4.5 catches he had while at Iowa. So, I mean, crazy productive as a touchdown weapon. You look at his sophomore year, 16.5 yards per reception, and you touched on some of his information here, but a college dominator, 82nd percentile, so that's reaching incredible levels. Yards per reception, 74th percentile. Breakout age, 85th percentile. So in addition to having the draft capital, the elite level athleticism, again, going back to what you said, 94th percentile SPARQ score. So an incredibly athletic guy. Touching on all these things, in addition to draft capital, all these things, I mean, Noah Fant is going to be one of those guys that should be a great success in the NFL. If nothing else, as a receiver, he's going to be an impossible cover for people when he learns to be a little bit more nuanced with that athleticism. I mean, he's just got so much to offer. I know when you're comparing him to Hockenson, he lacks in some of the things that we typically sort of call out these guys for. The blocking ability isn't up there with Hockenson. I've heard that he's not necessarily on the same level kind of as IQ as Hockenson on the field. But Noah Fant, man, in terms of just talking fantasy now, this is the guy that I'm interested in, because if he goes to a team, say like Green Bay, or he goes to a team like, and he won't, but the Colts, teams like this would be teams I'd love. But the problem is, if TJ Hockenson goes, possibly TJ Hawkinson's going between 9 and 15. Does that sound reasonable right now? Picks 9 and 15?
For sure. Yeah, I think they're both top 15 players personally.
So, yeah, and I mean, I guess Noah Fant would be just outside of that. I figure Noah Fant's not more than probably 5 picks behind TJ Hockenson, no matter what. There's going to be a run on these guys. So, both players people should be really interested in. I just think that Noah Fant's ceiling could be pretty incredible. I mean, pretty special with that athleticism. So it's something to look forward to.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about your number 3. And I think that this is kind of a typical number 3. But Irv Smith out of Alabama, why do you like him at number 3?
Yeah, so Irv Smith, again, I think coming in was probably that consensus number 3 pick. He might have, fell down a slot or two after the combine. In general, just an underwhelming combine for someone that on tape looked, a bit faster, just a lot more effortless after the catch. So 6'2", 242, 4'6", 340. Didn't expect him to obviously blaze like a Noah Fant type time in the 40, anything like that. But I didn't think he was 4'6", 3 either, which I guess isn't a bad time for him. But again, maybe I just set the bar unreasonably high for him. He paired that with a 32.5-inch vert. So again, not a great number by by any stretch of the imagination. So I think in general, given just how dominant Fant was, and again, it's not fair to put him up against someone like Fant, but that bar was set pretty high. So I would say Smith kind of underwhelmed a little bit at Indianapolis, which might have affected his ultimate final ranking on a lot of these positional rankings and big boards. So he's safely at 3 for me though. Some of the things to like, player profile, drops the Eric Ebron comparison, which is some pretty high praise. I would think he's one of the younger prospects coming out this year. Player profile has him at 20.7. So again, ceiling kind of remains high because of that. There is, I think, again, it's cliche, but with Irv Smith, you want to go back to the tape. The tape is really, really good. It's hard to ignore. Again, the player that he is after the catch, played in a great offense, of course, had a solid quarterback thrown to him, had a really good supporting cast. So that definitely does factor in a little bit. Had 7 scores last year, a little over 700 yards, 44 receptions. As Nate mentioned before, it's I think that's kind of typical and probably a bit higher end for what we like to see from tight ends in general. But I think Irv Smith just feels like, again, I keep throwing on the word safe, but in this group, he just feels like a safer prospect. He's younger. The tape looks good, and for him, his father was a former first round draft pick, so he has those hashtag bloodlines, which some people, if we're going to go super kind of narrative street on this, people do factor that in. So again, just a player that in this group, you could have him a couple different, a spot or two lower, whatever the case may be, but I think he's safely kind of in that top 5 conversation. I'm more than happy to kind of take him in that tight end 3 slot, which could be maybe the end of day 1, if not sometime at the top or middle of that second round.
And yeah, compared to the other 2 guys that we just mentioned, also Irv Smith is just a little bit smaller than these guys, a little lighter, a little shorter, 6'2", 242. So not one of the bigger tight ends that we're going to talk about. But I don't think that's necessarily like a detriment to what he's going to be in the NFL. I know scouts like him as a blocker. I think he's kind of projected in that second round range. There's other tight ends in this class that are more athletic than he is, that, ones that we haven't named yet. I think the brand equity coming from Alabama, playing the competition that he played, his tape kind of gets a boost from that. You see him play well against upper level competition, and that stands out. And we've seen in the past tight ends come out of Bama and do well in the NFL and not have a ton of work at the collegiate level. His 2018 was really good, and that's also a benefit of having a much better quarterback than they've had for quite some time in Alabama. I'm sure O.J. Howard would have loved to have that, but 44 catches, 710 yards, at 16 yards per reception, so it really stands out from a production standpoint. And Irv Smith's one of those guys that, in terms of dynasty, I never necessarily reach on tight ends, because I feel like tight ends typically take a little while to break out. These guys go to the NFL, they're learning their assignments, they're learning how to block at the NFL level, they're being used, sparingly. George Kittle is just a wild example. It's not always like that. Look at guys like Max Williams, some of these guys that they might never break out. But if I'm looking to draft these guys, I'm not taking any of these tight ends till much later. Noah Fant, Hockenson, that might be a different story, but when you're talking about dynasty and rookie drafts, you're typically not looking at these guys very early. And this is kind of a hybrid show. We're kind of talking from an NFL draft level, and I'm trying to spin some of that dynasty fantasy on it too. But yeah, I like Irv Smith, man. I'm with you. I wish the athleticism was a little better. The top end speed wasn't bad. 4.63, and I think you mentioned this player profiler comps him to Eric Ebron. But the burst, the agility, not really there. And I don't think he ever looked like he was really great, like as a short area mover. I don't think that was something that people expected to stand out in his profile. But I do think he's going to be a tough cover for linebackers or safeties at the next level. So it's a guy to definitely keep an eye on. Here's a name that intrigues me because he's been getting a lot of buzz. You're number 4, Jace Sternberger, Texas A&M. Why do you have him at number 4?
Yeah, so he's kind of similar in the Irv Smith role, in that he probably doesn't do much for a lot of people as far as athleticism is concerned. 6'4", 250, 4'7", 40, which is, you can cue the disappointing trumpet and all that stuff, man. 31.5-inch vertical. So again, nothing about, if you're just looking at his test results, there's nothing about those numbers that you're gonna, you're necessarily gonna get excited about. What he did do, again, going back to the tape, he was someone that was a former JUCO player. He was a Kansas transfer, and no one's standing out in a Kansas offense. So what he did was he ended up he found himself at Texas A&M, where he ended up becoming a consensus All-American first team, All SEC type player, man, which again says a lot more probably about, says maybe something about Kansas, I should say. But again, we can just imagine the type of player, the type of numbers that he would put up if he was in this kind of environment all along. And again, I think it bodes well for his projection at the next level. As far as numbers and stuff like that, over 100 yards, 17.3 yards per reception, 10 scores last year on 48 receptions. So again, at the upper end of that tight end box score that we like to highlight, just a really dominant and impressive campaign. And it shows up in his player profile as well. 91st percentile college dominator rating. 93rd in his college yards per reception, 35th percentile SparkX score. So again, the good with the bad. Not a player you're probably going to roll the dice on given his athletic ability, but again, going back to the tape, one of the cleaner route runners kind of profiles as that kind of big slot, Evan Ingram type player without that athleticism, of course, which is not why I'm not trying to draw that parallel. But again, I think he can line up and impact the game in a similar fashion. So a bit more of a projection given the questions that we have athletically, but the box score is certainly there. And if you go back to the tape again, you just see a really strong campaign, and a player that's probably ascending at the right time and is going to capitalize off of that.
Yeah, this is a guy that Lance Zierlein had him as a Jacob Tammy type, and that feels fair. I mean, that feels close. Round projection 3-4, which again seems about right. He's been picking up some buzz here recently. His name's been coming up as we get closer to draft day here. And I think this is one of those years where some of these tight ends, this guy, like you said, he is a good route runner. It does stand out. He does play like a bigger wide receiver, kind of play that slot role like you're talking about a little bit. And when you go look back at college, I know you touched on his college dominator, but let's go back down to the raw stats and look at his competition. I mean, Courtney Davis, the only other player on this team, had 3 less catches than he did. So he had more catches than the number 1 wideout on this roster. He had more receiving yards than the number 1 wideout on this roster by about 300 yards. He had more touchdowns than the number 1 receiver on this roster. So he was the go-to in all facets of the pass game on this team and averaged the most yards per reception on the whole roster. So literally every box you can check: receptions, yards, touchdowns, yards per reception. The dude maxed it all out, and that's why we're seeing this college dominator that's so high, and that's why we're seeing these college yards per reception that are that high. This is the type of guy, and I know the Seattle Seahawks, as a homer, I'm obligated to bring this up. This is a guy that they brought in, that they've done a visit with, and he seems like the type of guy that a Seattle could utilize. A guy that needs a little work as a blocker, but is an effective receiver. It would be a good fit there. There's a lot of rosters that could use him. So this is a guy I'm excited to see, especially in fantasy. This is a guy that's going to be there much later in the draft. People are going to be looking at some of these, more athletic running backs that are going to be falling the Zigbos, the Darren Halls, I'm drawing blanks here on some of these names. But anyways,
you got him, man.
Alex Barnes. So these guys are going to be floating here later in these drafts, second round. And guys like this are going to float a little later. And this is a guy that I would be excited to take a chance on. You touched on the fact that, no, his athleticism isn't elite. But in a typical tight end class, this is not so far below the average. The Hockensons, the Fants, those guys were so far above average. The George Kittles when they show up. Even a guy that we might bring up later, Caleb Wilson, a pretty good athlete. Waring, there's a bunch of guys in this class that have really good athleticism. This is a guy that's a little lower, but man, you can't ignore that production. Really good from him, really exciting. So this is a guy that I'm interested to see where he goes. Landing spot could definitely drive his stock up. All right, man. Number 5. All right, hold on a second here. This is a number 5 that we don't normally see this name pop up. I don't hate this name, but I'm definitely interested to get the Ryan Lopes analysis on Dawson Knox out of Ole Miss.
This might be more of a homer pick, I guess, for me. Someone that I was kind of high on early on in the process, and I just haven't been able to let go necessarily. So I guess you can call me stubborn, but this is certainly more of a projection. We have very little, if nothing, compared to others to go off of as far as college production. Just wasn't utilized at all. Redshirted freshman season, literally the box score is empty. Sophomore campaign, 24 receptions, 300 yards. Junior campaign, 15 receptions, 280 yards. So that's kind of the first chapter of this story, so to speak, is why wasn't he used more in a fairly fun and active Mississippi offense? There just wasn't a role for him. Is that more on him? Is that more on the staff? So that's certainly a question. People that have him lower, as people probably will have him much lower than where I have them, I imagine a lot of their argument is based around just the general unknown as far as what he really brings to the table. We're talking about 39 career receptions here, which isn't much to really go off of. The main selling points for Dawson Knox for me is just, again, there's a lot of the unknown there, but the athletic profile and his build and the way he does move and plays the game when he was involved, to me, again, I think he's probably a little more landing spot dependent as a result, but I think in the right system, in the right environment, someone could really kind of unlock all of his potential. He came in as a quarterback recruit. The dude stands at 6'4", 254. I believe he was timed with at an unofficial 40 around the 4.51, 4.57 range at the Ole Miss Pro Day. So again, it's really pretty impressive numbers. Even more impressive when you know that he was only about 12 weeks removed from a hernia surgery as well. So that's probably another box that kind of gets crossed off the list. Injuries, injury concerns, and stuff like that. I really don't have much more to really kind of talk about as far as obviously the production's not there. So this is certainly more of a projection for me, a player that I'm really interested in, just given his athletic profile. And I think it's kind of this part of the tight end class in general where I personally kind of start to lump them together, whether it's the Knoxes, the Max. You mentioned the San Diego State tight end as well. These guys, Foster Moreau from LSU, these guys are all kind of, there are questions about their game, whether it's competition, whether it's production, whatever the case may be, but they all have the common thread, which is the athletic profile. So it's probably splitting hairs with a lot of these guys. Again, if you have Knox another 3, 4, 5, 6 slots down, you have some other names above him. I'm not gonna get in your face about it. But for me, I like the potential here. Just again, goes back to that athletic profile and kind of what I've seen him flash, what I've seen him be able to do, where I think he could go. So certainly more of a projection, more of a dice roll.
The projection thing makes sense though, man. I mean, look at this. So he's missed some time with injuries. You go in and look at the amount of games that he played. He played 18 collegiate football games, had 39 catches. You talk about projections. Look, George Kittle played more games than that and only had 48. So it's hard to say with these guys what they will or won't be. Right. And at least in Dawson Knox, in his defense, he played next to A.J. Brown. He played with DeMarcus Lodge. He played with DK Metcalf. Van Jefferson caught a bunch of balls too amongst that time. So there's a lot of mouths to feed. There's arguably 2 first-round guys in here. DeMarcus Lodge is maybe a 3rd or a 4th or a 5th. I don't know where the NFL is necessarily going to evaluate him. But you've got 3 likely drafted receivers from this roster alone. And he was the tight end, which just typically in college, just isn't a weapon. It's not always a weapon. But with these nagging injuries and stuff like that, those type of things stand out. But the athleticism was good enough. In terms of projection, he's 6'4", 254. He's got adequate height for the position, 63rd percentile spark score. So not bad. I mean, not bad at all. Again, when we compare him, like looking at the last guy that we talked about, Sternberger, you know, it's better than Sternberger in that sense. Maybe not as polished as a receiver, doesn't quite have the accolades, the counting stats, but shows enough that an NFL team is definitely going to be into him. When you look at NFL.com, they've got him as a round 2 projection.
Yeah,
they've got him as a Kyle Rudolph type.
Yeah, I saw that. That's a Zerline's running comparison there. Again, I think, and he talks up kind of the him, you know, in the gym, in the weight room. It's all about projection with this kid, and it's all about kind of his workout numbers and what he's really able to do. And you want to get him, like I said, you want to get him with the right staff that's going to really kind of take advantage of that. And as a result, probably a little more landing spot dependent, but.
Yeah, I mean, landing spot dependent is definitely true. It's almost like a draft stock thing to me, because I don't necessarily think a team that's taking him is taking him off his blocking prowess. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're looking at him like he has the physical traits. If we could teach him to block better, he's got the size to be a blocker, but he's also got the traits as a receiver. I mean, he does look natural catching the ball. Again, not a lot to go by the tape, but when you see him, it does at least look natural, which is kind of step one to what you want to see in these players sort of going forward. If we're going to project him to be a weapon in the passing game, show me those abilities. Don't necessarily be a body catcher.
Right.
Use your frame, and he does it. So some of these things stand out. And again, this is on a roster that had some of the, I mean, when it's all said and done, DK Metcalf and AJ Brown could be two of the better receivers to enter the league over the last decade, potentially, if they pan out. And I know a lot of people are calling for DK Metcalf's downfall. I don't know that that's going to happen, but these are two super talented guys, in addition to DeMarcus Lodge kind of eating away at that production as well. So really good name. Love the potential, love the athleticism. It's a guy definitely people should be looking at. So that kind of wraps up the number 5. That was the 5 guys that Ryan had in his list. I don't know if you want to touch on maybe one or two more.
Well, I was actually going to ask you if there is either a name that you would either slot inside the top 5 or, kind of in that next tier, so to speak, of players, 6, 7, 8, whatever the case may be. Or is there a name or two that you're personally, again, I know you mentioned the San Diego State kid. There might be a player from UCLA too that you really like. I mean, is there? So I mean, do you want to throw out a name or two and kind of let us know kind of where your head is at as far as this class?
For sure. I think between you and I think our 1, 2, 3 are about the same. Where I might deviate a little bit is 4 or 5. I like Jace Sternberger. I think he definitely stays in that top 5. But I think Caleb Wilson is a name that a lot of people know. The athleticism, the burst wasn't super high. If you look at him, especially on Player Profiler, they comp him to Julius Thomas. But he has the 40. He has the speed. The agility, 46th percentile, not great. A little bit undersized at 240, but 6'4". But really standing out here is that college dominator. This was a guy at UCLA that put up monster numbers, 114 receptions over his college career, and that's because he went down as a sophomore and only played 5 games. I mean, he led his team in receiving yards in 2018. He led his team in catches, yards per reception. He was number 2. It's really impressive production from this guy. And when you go look at what he was on pace for in 2017, it's just incredible. I mean, after 5 games, he had 490 receiving yards. So he was, again, on pace to break nearly 1,000 yards. This could have been a guy that, if all the cards played out right, could have had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons as a tight end, and then tests out reasonably athletic, kind of that Irv Smith-ish type, a little faster than Irv Smith, but kind of a letdown amongst some of the other things. Catch radius, not enormous. Agility, not great. But again, as a tight end, I'm not really looking for that short area quickness. It's great, if you're an Evan Ingram, if you're a Noah Fant, if you're one of these, twitchy guys. But Caleb Wilson checked a lot of boxes, and he's one of those guys that's just purely from an offensive weapon standpoint. This is one of those guys that I think people can get behind. I don't know what your thoughts on him are. I know that some people don't necessarily like his route running, not big fans of, his hand-eye coordination. I've seen that come up with Zerline and some of these other scouts. But this is a guy, in terms of being a tight end, that really proved himself as a receiver.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely a little bit lower on him, but I think we might find some common ground with the San Diego State kid, Waring. He's just someone that I guess I kind of gravitate towards those players as far as the athletic profile they're testing, especially when we're talking about kind of in this tier of players, more pure projection. I'm gonna probably end up siding with the cliche, the whole body beautiful and high end athletes and all that stuff. That's kind of where I'm gonna end up pushing my chips if I had to make a kind of decision. And Kyle Waring, man, he's someone that going back, you were talking about the NFL.com scouting profiles with Lance Zierlein here. He has Waring, man, in that round 2 to 3 range, which might be the highest that I've kind of seen him mocked. Again, I'm probably a bit lower on him than that myself personally, but there's probably people out there that do believe in that kind of that upside projection. 2 or 3 seems a bit rich for me. He does drop a Todd Heap comparison, which again a pretty powerful name. A pretty popular name in that regard. So the story on Waring was as Lance details here, man. He doesn't have much football under his belt, but Zierlein notes that he's that competitive toughness. He's played every other sport at a pretty high level, whether it's basketball, soccer, cross country, whatever the case may be. So kind of newer to the game of football, but again. I think the competitive skill set, the competitive nature, that stuff, again, if we want to get super coach cliche about it, stuff like that does matter. We know these NFL front offices, for better or for worse, really dive into that, and really, stuff like that holds a lot of weight. Had a really strong combine. It's 6'5", another 6'5", 250 prospect, which again, as you touched on before, those numbers kind of check the threshold boxes, so to speak. 4'6", 40, 36.5-inch vert, 122-inch broad. So again, checking all the type of athletic boxes. Not much to really talk about production-wise. I think he logged about 50 career receptions at San Diego State. I'm sure people talk about the competition level and all that other stuff, but again, a player that's ascending at the right time, kind of parlaying that strong combine, and I'd be surprised if he went in that 2 to 3 round range, but Zierlein's obviously a lot more dialed in than I am. So just a player that I'm a little more comfortable with, to use air quotes around comfortable, as far as his projection.
Right, and and coming from San Diego State, this is a team that only threw for like about 2,300 yards. So not a high volume passing game, but he did lead his team in receptions, despite only playing, part of the year, playing 9 games total. So yeah, there's a lot to like. I'm with you. I would definitely, err on the side of a guy with high level athleticism. The production, again, not necessarily there, but at the same time, we go back to the George Kittle conversation. George Kittle didn't really have that much production coming out of college, 22 catches in a season or something in that range. So looking at a guy like Waring, I can see it, man. Player profiler comps into Logan Thomas. I don't know.
Quarterback Logan Thomas.
Well, that's the way things are looking here. I'm not. No, tight end Logan Thomas.
Okay.
So it's it's an interesting profile. It will be super interesting to see where he goes, because damn, second round. I've heard his name come up.
That's crazy. Yeah.
But man, that's really, really high. But again, like you said, Zerline's super tuned in, so. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe he's more on the backside of that round 3, round 4. But either way, I think that's still higher than a lot of people would have projected him to go in the first place. So, all right, man. Well, you got anything else you want to add to the tight ends, or is that that pretty much do it.
That's again, it's a pretty fun class. I don't think it's 2017 good. There are some athletes. 2017 was just really stacked between the Kittles, the Njokus, and everyone in between. OJ Howard. So I think if this class, if we get another 2 to 3 kind of high end or high end contributors, we really could be kind of in the middle of like a tight end, renaissance, so to speak. I know Matt Kelly on one of his recent spots. It might have been the pod with Davis Maddock, but Kelly was talking about just how a really good tight end just totally makes an offense, and unfortunately we haven't really been gifted too many of those tight ends that are able to kind of make that transition. Not even just immediately, just in general. It seems to be just a tougher position to make that jump at the next level or project comfortably, whatever the case may be. So there are some players here that definitely intrigue. Again, we had a good 2017 group. I think we're going to start to see a lot more contributions from other names in that class as well. And if we get a couple more this year, then I think the position group's going to be in pretty good hands.
I agree, man. Well, dude, this was a good one. I like your takes on it, man. You were ready. You let those takes fly.
So what we do around here.
You gotta stand by them, bro, because when it's all said and done, 3 years from now, when somebody digs this thing up, they find the time capsule and they pull this thumb drive out and
they're
they
gonna
put
yell at
this
you
on.
and they yell at me.
Yeah, when Dawson Knox washes out of the league 2 games into his NFL career, they're going to come for you, bro.
I can't wait.
They're going to headhunt you. I can't wait either. I'm super excited. I'm jacked. I'm ready. Super excited for that. All right, man. Well, we'll get back next week, and we'll have a brand new topic. We might have a guest. I don't know, man. It's a very fluid situation
Very fluid around here.
Nobody has any control of what's going on. We just keep pressing forward, though.
It is a ship without a captain right now. We're just going. We're just going.
Got their hands up, whatever way the wind blows us.
That's it.